been 5 weeks since the Super Bowl, and for those of us who were rooting for the Seahawks, our therapist over these last 5 weeks have been encouraging us to talk about it, something I think I'm going to do this morning in the context of the reading from Corinthians. True, we hope time and time again we could just wake up after all these weeks from this terrible dream and replay those last sets of downs in which we Monday morning quarterbacks would have had sent Marshawn Lynch through the middle of the line and into the end zone, and we would have brought back to Seattle that trophy for a second year in a row. It's been 5 weeks, you'd think we'd get over it, but no, if only we could have done that. If only we would have done that rather than call that pass that resulted in an interception. If only we would have won. And as if I have to remind anyone, winning is the end-all of sports, and it's also the end-all of the wisdom of the world. Besides winning, doing the right thing, in quotation marks, is also an underpinning for the wisdom of the world. And we know that plays well in today's world because, of course, the headlines after headline judge Coach Pete Carroll of the Seahawks as not just calling the wrong play, but the worst call ever in the history of all of sports. And that seems just a little bit harsh. But harsh judgment is what propels so much of sports, and in fact, life in general. And in many ways, it's harsh judgment that contributes to the very wisdom of the world that St. Paul was talking about in his first letter to the Corinthians, from which we heard a portion this morning. Quite simply, being victorious in football is not far removed from being victorious in life and victorious in religion. Pass the test and you're in. Blow it and you are toast. A few days after the Super Bowl, in which Carroll was blamed once again for having made the wrong call, the losing play, he sat down with Matt Lauer, who is the host of NBC's Today Show, and he said, "This play will not define me." The next morning when I read that quotation in print, I had to smile, for of course Carroll was right. That play does not define him, nor does it define anyone at all, because God will never let that be the case. And here's why. Some years ago, I remember hearing a story about Pete Carroll, who at that time was coach of the University of Southern California. And being a University of Washington Husky, we were not that greatest friends. We weren't on the best of terms. But there was a story about Coach Carroll and also a young boy by the name of Ricky Roas. And thanks to some really remarkable people at the athletic department at USC 2 weeks ago, I was able to once again retrieve those articles and the news video talking about what I'm about to tell you. One day, Ricky was brought to USC for a football practice by a friend who also gave him a helmet that he could go and collect the players' autographs. Immediately that day, he fell in love with USC football. After a while and a lapse in time, young Ricky returned to the sidelines and discovered that he could actually help these great big football players drink their Gatorade, that green stuff that comes out of the big orange tanks. He could help them do it by handing them the cup. Because of their heavily taped hands, they'd often have trouble getting those cups. When he discovered that he could do something like that, he then went to Carroll and asked him if he could have a job. And Coach Carroll said, "You betcha." And later on, he saw even more remarkable things in Ricky, and so he made him a special assistant to the coach. It wasn't easy for this kid. He had to take a bus for nearly 2 hours from East Los Angeles, leaving what most of us would say was an unimaginably hard, if not unbearable life to get to USC every day. Ricky also stands 4 feet 8 inches tall because of a very rare form of bone cancer. He has no money whatsoever, and because of a learning disability, he couldn't sign his name. But Coach Carroll took that kid and made him the heart and soul of the football team and an institution on the sidelines for every home game. How can I do this? Carroll asked, repeating a question from a reporter concerning Ricky's presence. How can I not do this? Looking at Ricky's interaction with players who now play in the NFL and watching then quarterback Mark Sanchez throw footballs to kids like Ricky, Coach Carroll remarked, "See that over there? That's who we are. That's what we do." After a while, Ricky became indispensable to the team spirit, and he got to travel on a road game up to Oregon to play the Ducks. First time on a plane. First time in a hotel. First time in a shirt and tie. First time sleeping in a bed by himself. Amazing. The Los Angeles Times, from which I've gleaned most of these elements of this story, ended with this. Before the game, Ricky walked the field while staff members took photos of him. You can see those photos today. He carries them around in his sweatshirt. The images are of a tiny guy in a rumpled shirt and loose-fitting tie standing in the middle of a giant, pristine football field. David become Goliath. "Look at me," Ricky says. "Can you believe that's me? Look at the giant football program leaning down to embrace the smallest among us. Believe it's them. Believe that of all the steamrolling victories in the Pete Carroll era, none can match the gentle daily touch his team applies to the neighborhood. As much as Trojan fans were thankful for the likes of Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart, they should also be thankful for the magical, mysterious Ricky. I have to go," he says suddenly during the interview, standing up tall, straightening his dirty cap, adjusting his soiled sweatshirt. "Coach needs me." My God, that's a good story. But there's more. Also, some years ago, 60 Minutes ran a segment on Coach Carroll, again, while he was still at USC. At one point, the commentator gushed this laundry list of all the accomplishments of his coaching career. He obviously was a very successful man. To borrow concepts from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, how about having 2 national championships to prove that? If anyone needed evidence of wisdom, surely his unorthodox winning ways with the team showed good judgment. But in a world where winning and success, as measured on the balance sheet that's found in the sports section of the paper, is so terribly important, the commentator then turned us away from that and, drawing on what I think is God's foolishness, pointed us in another direction by talking about the Pete Carroll that nobody really knows and who has played out life in a scene very far away from the grass in a stadium, surrounded by 93,000 screaming, approving fans. For the longest time, Coach Carroll, without any security or cameras, traveled at night into the most dangerous parts of Los Angeles, trying to convince gang members to drop the violence and to come together. No one really knew about it because, again, this does not fall into the wisdom of the world. But many of these young men who had already spent time in prison found in Carroll a new friend they could call by name. He even gave these guys his cell phone number. These men, who by all odds were headed back to prison or to death, found life because this guy, who never needed to go there to prove anything, brought life to them. He's responsible for an effort called A Better LA, A Better Los Angeles, which does much today to break people out of gangs. No wonder CBS began that report by saying that his day job as a football coach is going gangbusters, but it is his night job that got him on 60 Minutes. No, that last play that a lot of us still remember like it was yesterday will not define Pete Carroll. True, he is far from perfect. He has his foibles, as do all of us. One big difference is we don't show our foibles in front of 90 million people on a Sunday afternoon. But there is one thing I think he does show the world. In order to be reconciled with God, which of course is a subject for Lent, you need to be one with those around you, including those who will not make it, as the world suggests making it takes place. Or, to put it another way, you might have to be open enough to embrace the stone that the builders reject, be it young Ricky, be it Jesus. You also have to be reconciled to the fact that occasionally you are going to call play that just won't work. So how do you pick yourself up after losing the Super Bowl? Are you spiritual? Asked Matt Lauer for that NBC Today Show interview. Very much so, replied Carroll. No kidding. He is not only spiritual, but as God is also seen on occasion, Coach Carroll is foolish as well. You can't help but wish during the season of Lent, when we focus on reconciliation at the expense sometimes of maybe even winning, that all the world was similarly foolish as well. Amen.